So, good morning, all of you, and let's. Though the title of the lecture sounds very boring, Introduction to Bacteria, Classification and its Structure, I'll just tell you how it is relevant to the student of medicine. We are talking like this online, so it's not possible to interact. Normally, what used to happen in this class, I would always ask the students, and honestly, all of you could tell why there is, what relevance does it have to the undergraduate students or to the subject of medicine. So it was very interesting how all of you came out with various applied importance of understanding structure and classification. So from your feedback, I've tried to summarize at the end. Let's quickly now start working on the talk. Let's see. So let's first see what are the learning objectives for today. So you should be able to acquire knowledge about the bacterial morphology in order to identify them when present in a clinical specimen. Classify bacteria based on this information, correlate the structure with pathogenic potential, and use this information in describing antibiotics and vaccine targets. So let's see. So first we'll have to go through the basic structure of the bacteria, and as and when we go through this, I'll tell you also the relevance. Now, just to get the perspective, microorganisms are basically prokaryotes. They are bacteria, rickettsia, chlamydia, mycoplasma. The eukaryotes are fungi, protozoa, helminths. So all of these cause infections. And viruses are between the living and the non-living. As you know, they are dependent upon the host cell for replication. So, since we are talking of bacteria and that is a prokaryote, let's see what is the characteristic of a prokaryote. It has a simple nucleus, homogeneous without a nuclear membrane or a nucleolus, with a single chromosome having a circular double-stranded DNA. These all you must have read in your schools also. So, it lacks internal membranes which isolate specific organelles. And one important thing is the cell wall, which contains peptidoglycan, which is different from other cells. So, bacteria is a prokaryotic unicellular organism. It is microscopic, about 1 micron on an average, and bacteria is present everywhere. And most of them are harmless. They don't cause disease. In fact, bacteria came into the world much before we came, and when a human being was formed, our body contained many bacteria, and they exist as a normal flora called also as commensals on our body. In fact, there is a symbiotic relationship between bacteria and the humans. So, what is a normal flora? We first understand that we are surrounded all around by bacteria and also on our mucous membranes and skin. So these are mostly commensal bacteria which are useful for human host, except when the normal barrier is broken. So we have a normal intact skin, we have a mucosa, we have some enzymes, but due to some reason when the normal barrier is broken, then these can invade inside the sterile body sites and cause infections. And some of the one example is E. coli, that can go from our gastrointestinal tract, cause UTI, or can, when it enters the blood, cause sepsis. A very small proportion is pathogenic, which are really so-called pathogens having virulence factor, and Streptococcus pyogenes causing pharyngitis, Salmonella typhi causing typhoid fever are some of the examples of the pathogenic bacteria. Means they do not live as commensals on our body. Very few now are opportunistic pathogens which cause infections in an immunocompromised host, which is one example is the Mycobacterium other than tuberculosis. And these you will read as and when you come through the systemic bacteriology. So this is just a picture of various shapes, because we have to talk of morphology. So there are cocci, there are bacilli, the cocobacilli, fusiform bacteria, curved vibrio, spiral, spirillum, spirochetes. So these are some of the shapes that we see. A bacterial cell has the various components, again as is a component of a cell, any cell, living cell wall, cytoplasmic membrane, a nuclear material. It has a capsule, flagella, fimbriae, inclusion granules and spores. So we'll just one by one come to this very briefly, understanding its relevance. So this is just a picture from the book. So you see, you are familiar with the cell. So the only thing I want to tell here is that there is a flagella, you see, and these green structures thin are the pilus or the fimbriae. The rest you all know. There is DNA, there are ribosomes, cytoplasm, there is a cell wall, there is a capsule, cytoplasmic membrane. So let's go to them one by one. The most important part of a bacteria, which is a unicellular, and the cell wall, which actually first comes in contact, or more likely to come in contact with the human host. So where interaction occurs. So we have to understand this cell wall. It has many important implications, and we'll come to them. So if you look at this picture, this is from your textbooks, you must have seen this. There is a gram-positive cell wall, there is a gram-negative cell wall. And you see the difference, that in the gram-positive cell wall, the peptidoglycan is very thick, while in the gram-negative, the peptidoglycan, if you see there, is very, I don't know if I can use the mouse, okay, good. So this is the peptidoglycan in the gram-negative, which is very small, which is thin as compared to this peptidoglycan in the gram-positive. So you see this difference. Then one thing which you see absent in a gram-positive is the presence of a outer membrane, a bilayered outer membrane, which is present in the gram-negative. So we'll come to that. So these pictures show you there is a capsular polysaccharide outside. Sometimes there are some capsular proteins also. Then main thing is the peptidoglycan layer, which has some teichoic acid and a outer membrane, cytoplasmic membrane, and this comes the cytoplasm, the interior of the cell as we call it. So there are some lipoteichoic acid. So capsule, cell wall, and then we will come to the cytoplasm. In a gram-negative, again you see some capsular material, polysaccharide. Then you see this outer membrane bilayer, in which there is a porine channel, which you do not find in gram-negative positive. Then there is a lipopolysaccharide, which again is missing there. Then you have a thin peptidoglycan, and there is this periplasmic space. And then of course, similar to gram-positive, there is a cytoplasmic membrane and the interior of the cell. Now how does this structure help you in your day-to-day practice of patient management? First and foremost, this cell wall is the basis of a gram staining, which is the most rapid and a specific test to identify the presence of an infectious agent in a patient if you have a specimen. So if you do the gram staining of the patient sample, if he is suffering from any infection, you will immediately know what is present there, and you can start your therapy. Interestingly, this cell wall also determines what type of antibiotic you are going to give. Because of this cell wall difference, the antibiotics would act on a gram positive or a gram negative accordingly. So what is this gram positive and negative that I said? This is so today you people don't have practicals, so it is much easier if you have a hands-on practicals. Then you see how to do a gram stain, how does gram positive look, how does gram negative look. But anyway, this is a unprecedented circumstances, and we have to go ahead with whatever best we have. So this principle is based upon the cell wall composition, and also I must tell you, this is one of the most important question that is asked in the examination, in the practical examination. Almost all of you will be asked, internal assessment and final exam and everywhere. So this is based on the cell wall composition, and there are many theories, but most important for you to remember is that it is the thick peptidoglycan in gram positive and the outer membrane layer which has a high lipid content, which is the responsible for a gram negativity. So this is how, so I think I must tell you, because you didn't have practicals, but you will have something. So the in the gram positive looks blue, and then they could be gram cocci, bacilli, and the gram negative look pink, and they could be bacilli, cocci, cocobacilli, or any forms. I think you'll have your practicals today online and you can see. So I'll not spend time on that. This is how gram positive cocci look. This is Streptococcus pneumoniae. So if present in the sputum, you can immediately know this patient is suffering from pneumococcal pneumonia. These are lactobacilli. They may be present in the any vaginal epithelium is one example where you determine the vaginitis. Staphylococcus aureus in a pus sample, gram positive cocci. So these are gram positive cocci, different shape, gram positive bacilli, gram positive cocci in clusters, and this is Listeria species, which is small gram positive bacilli. Then there are gram negative bacilli, like Pseudomonas. They can be present in the pus, they can be present in urine or any other body secretion. There is gram negative bacilli like E. coli, little longer. This is in a urine. Then Neisseria gonorrhoeae in the urethral discharge. You see gram negative cocci, they are in pairs. And Brucella species, which is again gram negative coccobacilli. So there are other morphotypes also which you can see in special staining. Actinomyces, which is filamentous and on gram positive. This is Spirillum, gram negative. This is a special stain, dark ground, because these leptospira is so thin, they do not take up a stain. The cell wall should be visible on microscopy, because as you must have understood now that a microscope has its own power of resolution. So they are much thinner than these bacteria, so you cannot see by simple microscopy. So this is by dark ground microscopy. Then Campylobacter, which are spiral, again very fine, thin. These some of them seen direct on the tissue section staining, or you can see this is Mycobacterium tuberculosis on a clinical in a sputum sample. Again, I told you dark field microscopy, direct specimen you can see the urine deposit, leptospira. The other microscopy is a fluorescent microscopy, where you use a fluorescent stain and then you see this is for Mycobacterium tuberculosis. The advantage is it's much easier on the eyes to screen for with this. And this is again fluorescence, but using a specific antibody, so it becomes a specific, you identify also. Here it's a presumptive diagnosis, but here you can specifically say which organism depending upon the antibody that you have used. So now, so now the cell wall. Coming to a little bit of description. So we have understood what is the importance of cell wall. We have understood it is the most important factor in determining the gram staining reaction. And the gram staining reaction is not just merely one test of the lab. This also determines the susceptibility to antibiotics depending upon the structure. So again, coming back to the wall, it is first and foremost, it is the integrity of the cell wall is essential for the viability. So for bacteria, it is the viability. For us, there are targets in this. So it is for the viability. Peptidoglycan is the main strengthening component which has peptides and the glycans. which is comprised of N-acetylglucosamine and N-acetylmuramic acid. So why this is important to know? Because these are not present in our cells. So therefore, if you target this cell wall, you are likely to attack the bacteria and cause no damage to your own body. So this is the structure. You have these peptides, you have a glycan, and I told you N-acetylglucosamine, N-acetylmuramic acid, they are cross-linked. So what is the importance of all this? Antibiotics, they act at the level of the cell wall. The most important, the bactericidal antibiotics, which we depend a lot in case of sepsis, in case of severe infections, because they kill the bacteria. Bactericidal. So penicillins and other beta-lactams like cephalosporins, vancomycin, bacitracin, these are bactericidal. They kill the bacteria and they act at various sites on this cell wall, which you will read in pharmacology. And so I will not spend more time on the specific targets right now. And then one important thing is, now bacteria also becoming smart. They change the structure a little bit. They can replace one of this with another component, another peptide, and what happens? The resistance to antibiotics develop, and that is how they become resistant to penicillins, vancomycins, bacitracins. But if you see, most of them act on the gram-positive bacteria, and that's why I said peptidoglycan is a major component of a gram-positive cell. For a gram-negative, we would need something higher levels. These are some of the basic antibiotics. Now, the outer membrane of the gram-negative, as I told you, so moving from the gram-positive to the gram-negative, it is a bilayer structure, as I showed you, and the LPS is a very important component of this outer membrane. This LPS has a lipid A core polysaccharide, and the repeating sugar subunits. I'll just show you first this. So this is the lipopolysaccharide structure, which has a lipid A component here, which is in the cell. There is a core polysaccharide which is conserved across all gram-negative, all the family of a particular, for example, amongst Enterobacteriaceae. So this is what will come in the classification also. And then there are subunits, O subunits. These give the specificity to the bacteria. So these come in contact with the human body and are responsible for generating a specific antibody response, while these will generate a response which will be cross-reactive across all bacteria of a particular family. I think you get it. So let's again look at this. So this is a gram-negative, and this is a lipid A there, and this is, you see, these are the O antigen, and this is what gives the specific antibody response or specific serotyping, which can be used for classification, while the lipid A component gives the endotoxic property, which causes sepsis and septic shock, one of the major problems of a gram-negative bacteria. And if you understand that the problem here is, even if the antibiotic disintegrates this bacteria, if not given at the right time to stop its replication, then even a disintegrated bacteria can release the endotoxin. So, summarizing some of the other properties of the outer membrane, it prevents the entry of many antibiotics to act on the peptidoglycan. Okay. So this periplasmic space which you see, one is this porine, which prevents the, so everything has to enter very specifically. So this prevents the entry of many antibiotics, like as I told you, vancomycin, then penicillins, some early cephalosporins, first generation cephalosporins. So this periplasmic space is there, which is also contains enzymes which inactivate antibiotics like penicillin or some first generation cephalosporins. Then lipidase antitoxic causes shock. Then porine proteins form channels for sugars, amino acids, etc. So that is how a gram-negative bacteria has its potentials. Some teichoic acid which you saw in the picture is present in a gram-positive cell. Not very important, but we have to complete the list of the structure. However, in Streptococcus pyogenes, it has been shown to have role in the pathogenesis. So let's move on from the cell wall to cell cytoplasmic membrane. So like any other cell structure, it is a lipoprotein bilayered membrane, forms an osmotic barrier, actively affects the selective transport of specific nutrients into the cell wall and the transport outside the cell of the waste products. So this is all in your books. It permits passive diffusion of water, contains many respiratory enzymes. So this is a bacteria, all its functions and its day-to-day life. It has ribosomes which helps in its protein synthesis. It has enzymes which facilitate entry of metabolites. But for us, it has inclusion bodies which we can use as a special staining technique to identify this bacteria. For bacteria, they serve as a store for energy and reserve materials. Third, we move on to the bacterial DNA, which is a single circular DNA which lies as a supercoiled structure. This DNA is helpful in also the multiplication of the bacteria, simple binary fission. So this divides as well as the cell divides, and then the copy of DNA is formed, and 1 into 2, and like this 2 to the power of n it goes on. So then capsule. The capsule is what we are interested in. Again, for bacteria, the capsule is important because it gives its one cover. It also prevents a lot of antibiotics. It prevents the antibodies to come and attack. So it has a relevance for us. It's a slimy outer coat present in some bacteria, mainly polysaccharide. I showed you in the picture also. It protects the bacteria against ingestion by the phagocyte, which the human body is the natural phagocyte, the natural immune response, the cells. So it protects, it repels these cells, and it also, for identification, imparts bacterial growth a sticky mucoid character, which you can sometimes see. So if once you come back and do your practicals, you can see one bacteria, this is Klebsiella pneumoniae, which forms very mucoid colonies. You can actually lift it with the help of a loop. You can demonstrate capsule by a negative staining. So gram staining that we talked of was a positive staining. So you put a stain, you put the color and see the color. Here you put the color and the bacteria does not take up stain due to this capsule present there, which does not allow the stain to come. So what happens is the background is stained while the bacteria capsule you can see, and this is just because of the refractive index. You can see the dark color. It's not the stain. So this is a negative stain. India ink is one most commonly used negative stain. And so for bacteria, we don't generally use negative staining because we have gram staining, but this is used for in mycology for Cryptococcus neoformans, which you will again be introduced to in an introduction to mycology. Next structure is the flagella. You saw that big flagella in the bacterial in the picture of that bacterial cell. Flagella helps in the motility. So for a bacteria, it has an advantage that it can move away from toxic products if they form, and it can move towards nutrients. So that way it helps in motility, and this different positions are there which we use for their taxonomy and identification, and you can infer the presence of a flagella. So it's very fine, you cannot see it otherwise on the staining. So what we infer it day to day observation is by doing a motility test. Again, that you will do once you come back to the classes. And then besides that motility, you can actually see the presence of flagella by dark ground illumination, some special staining, and on electron microscopy. These are the various positions, and the importance is only to actually characterize, to understand the motility. For example, in Vibrio cholerae, it leads to the darting motility. In E. coli, this leads to the general motility that we see. So like this, it's mostly for characterizing, but these are the various sites. Again, you can see them in your textbooks. Then another important structure, pili or fimbriae. For us, the most important thing is, this is what is used by the bacteria to go and attach. The first target tissue. Why some cause respiratory tract, why some cause gastrointestinal, why skin. So like this, so they have a tissue tropism. So these fimbriae are the actual pathogenic potential of the bacteria. They give them an advantage to go and attach to specific receptors, and we can use this for a vaccine candidates, because if we can prevent the attachment on the first step itself, we can prevent the disease. So they attach to the specific receptor. Example is a P. pili of E. coli, which causes UTI. The other thing is, these can undergo antigenic variations and evade host immune response. This is seen as Neisseria gonorrhoeae. You'll read all these when you read the systemic infections. Then one is the sex pili, which is used for conjugation, exchange of genetic material. And one very important thing is, one is of some pathogenic virulence factors can be exchanged, but it is the transfer of the antibiotic resistance carrying plasmids through these sex pili, which has a lot of importance in the dissemination of antibiotic resistance across at one time, horizontal, which is very serious. So fimbriae are again very fine, you can only see by electron microscopy, and by electron microscopy they could demonstrate this conjugative pili or a sex pili, where the exchange between two bacteria, the chromosome is getting exchanged, or the DNA material, and plasmids get exchanged like this. Then I told you about inclusion granules, which are present in the cytoplasm. They are stored for energy. They can store glycogen, polyphosphates, but they stain on special staining, and which we use for diagnosis. And one most common diagnosis is for diphtheria, where you see metachromatic granules, these dots, or volutine granules they are called. Metachromatic because they take a different color from what stain that we use. It is by Albert stain. So you have seen Gram stain. Another stain is the Albert stain. Again, when we come to diphtheria, we will discuss more about that. The other structure is the spores. Now spores, if present in some, not all bacteria are sporulating, so if present, that is a very highly resistant resting stage in some bacteria. They can survive long phases of adverse environment. You know about Clostridium, tetani, Clostridium perfringens, botulinum. So these are some of the anaerobes where it is known, because anaerobes cannot survive in the presence of oxygen. So to stay for and in the adverse environmental condition, they can survive as spores. Once the conditions become favorable, they germinate back. They are very resistant to drying, heating and chemicals, and some of them, like Bacillus, are also used to test the sterilization cycles in an autoclave. Once we tell you about sterilization, disinfection, then we will also let you know how do we use these bacterial spores for just a second. Bacterial spores for testing the quality of an autoclave, where the autoclave should have killed these spores. They need very high temperature, and the autoclave must reach up to 121 degrees centigrade. So if you keep the spores as a challenge in your cycle of autoclaving, if these spores get killed, that means you have achieved the temperature. And mostly Bacillus stearothermophilus is one example of very resistant, thermal resistant spores. So this is just one example. We use spores for all other sterilization cycles also. So after understanding this structure and various components of a bacterial cell, we also, to complete the topic, we'll do the taxonomy. Taxonomy is how do you name. You have to name them as per the international standards, because it should, whatever you say this organism is in your hospital or in a patient or in any research studies, must be named the same when it is done in any other lab, any part of the world. So therefore there is a international classification, and how we write it also, again, that you have all read. The genus you write with the capital, and species we write with the small, and this is written in italics. So when you write the name of a bacteria, it is written in italics with the species as small and genus as a capital. So how does, for a clinical microbiologist, what is the role of taxonomy? So first is the gold standard is based on DNA relatedness. So is it, for example, you have Enterobacteriaceae amongst gram-negative, so they are all related and put together in one family, in different families, tribes. So there is a family, then there are tribes. So again, when we come to Enterobacteriaceae, we'll talk about that. So, and all of them have a name that you know: Streptococcus pneumoniae, Salmonella typhi, Staphylococcus aureus. So these are all based upon the international classification, which one can access through the manual. A Burgess manual is there, which is used to put all the updated classification of the bacteria. But for our day-to-day, how do we use this classification in clinical microbiology, clinical practice? The morphology. So as I told you, the gram staining, is it gram positive or gram negative? So can be used in your day-to-day practice to identify the type of infection and thereby decide the antibiotic. Staining, similarly, you use with that practice. Cultural characters is one other way of taxonomy. So you grow them on the culture plates, and based upon their growth, you have certain characters, which again you will read when you talk of cultures and staining. There will be a separate class. So based upon that, you can have hemolytic colonies, beta hemolytic, alpha hemolytic. You can have colonies which are lactose fermenting, non-lactose fermenting. So this is actually used in the day-to-day practice. Biochemical reactions are also used for your identification. You have one small set of biochemicals for the pathogenic organisms, which can identify which bacteria it is based upon their attack on specific chemicals. Then the antigenic structure that I told you, the O side chains or any other capsule or any other structure which is present on the cell wall, can be used for its specific antibody response as a diagnostic tool, the serodiagnosis. And so I'll come to that in my next slide, after which I'll end this talk. Why now this is important for a medicine students? So specific therapy based on identification, selection of an antibiotic, you have to understand the local epidemiology. Okay, you may say, how is it important to me if I know it is gram negative and this antibiotic acts on the gram negative cell wall, and you have given me an antibiotic to which it is effective by the antimicrobial susceptibility test. How does it matter whether it is Klebsiella pneumoniae or Klebsiella oxytoca? So for a patient it doesn't matter, but for your local epidemiology it is important. You must understand what are the common organisms causing infections in your hospital, in your country, in your state, because that way you can, one is you can compare between different parts of the country, different parts of the world, and you can also subsequently, when the patient comes to you, when on the 0 hour you don't have time to wait for cultures, while you send the samples for cultures, you have to start the treatment. So that knowledge on what are the possibilities and what should you give first is dependent on that previous generated information. So that is known as your local epidemiology. So that is used for your presumptive diagnosis and your empirical antibiotic, as it is called, empirical antibiotic, which is given first based upon your understanding and the local epidemiology. Then you use the structures, the antigen, as I told you, for diagnosis by serology, serological diagnosis. Then vaccine designs, the fimbriae or the antigens you use to design various vaccines, or any other toxic components are used to design vaccines. Then you also understand the pathogenesis, like I told you, where does the fimbriae act, what are the enzymes, what are the toxins. They help you understand the pathogenesis of the disease, and thereby you manage the patients, you formulate other strategies for its prevention and control. And of course, research for more targets of therapy. So basic science is also very important, because that way you develop some more targets for vaccines as well as therapy. And I think these days you are all aware how things are evolving for COVID-19. So somewhere in 1940s, the same thing must have happened with Staph aureus, with Streptococcus pneumoniae. Everybody was struggling what to do. This plasma therapy. So first time this was given, serum therapy was given for Streptococcus pneumoniae. So when no antibiotics were available, they just knew that if the patient who has recovered from pneumonia, if you give serum, then the person recovers. So these are some of the, and vaccines, how they are evolving, how various serodiagnosis, its relevance, what is it, the present serodiagnosis is not useful in the protective antibody. I think it has a lot of learning, and you can put the same thing for bacteria in that background and understand. Thank you. I think I'll end this lecture here, and I don't know if you have any questions. Let me see if you will tell me how do I answer them.